It's interesting. I was a second year at MIT in 1992, and I had an opportunity to sit down with Steve Jobs, and one-on-one. And Steve gave me some great advice. He thought I was completely wasting my time doing anything in grad school, and he wondered why I wasn't out in the real world experiencing things. And I didn't necessarily take that advice to heart. I realized that this would be a good opportunity to start writing some things down. And I've had 20 plus years of high tech for the most part. And this is a collection of thoughts and guidance that people have given me. I've had the great fortune of working with people like Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Steve Jobs, Andy Grove, and a couple other people, Jeff Bezos. So hopefully you'll take something away from this. I've had an interesting career. This is not meant to be a CV. Sorry for the length. But I'll tell you a funny story, because people are like, oh, you must have had some master plan, and how do you plan your life out? I was living in Phoenix, working for Intel, and I had an opportunity to move to Seattle to join a startup. It's actually not even on here. It was a Bill Gates-owned startup. And I'm an engineer, so my wife and I basically put down the pros and cons of staying in Phoenix versus moving to Seattle. And we couldn't decide. So my wife said, we need to get away. Let's go to Cancun for the weekend, and we'll make this decision. So what do you do in Cancun? You don't sit around and talk about life choices. You go to the beach, do whatever you're going to do, right? So Saturday night, my wife's like, hey, we spent the whole weekend. We never talked about our decision. So I said, yeah, that's right. Okay. And I said, look, I have no idea how to make this decision. And she said, I have an idea, and I know how to solve this problem. She came back with 2 shots of tequila and a quarter and said, tails, Phoenix, heads, Seattle. We did the shot, we flipped the coin, and that's how I ended up in Seattle. So there's career planning 101. That's not the piece of advice to take. I consider myself a West Coaster. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio, went to school here in Indiana, of course, and have lived on the East and the West Coast. But again, I consider myself pretty much a dyed-in-the-wool West Coaster, be it good or be it bad. So I call this my grandchildren list, right? In 15, 20 years, I have a 16-year-old. There are very high expectations on this kid for grandchildren. But in 15 to 20 years, hopefully not sooner, this is, when my grandkids ask me, what am I most proud of? They don't care. They're never going to care about who I work for or titles or anything like that. But first and foremost, my education. I'm actually the first person in my family to ever get a college education. My family just didn't have the money to go to college, and I'm really happy for the sacrifices they made. My family is the most important thing that I have. They don't take me very seriously. I think they're far less impressed with me than anybody else, so that's always nice to go home to that. But I've been lucky enough to have been part of history. I was on the startup team of the Pentium, which became the modern era microprocessor. I helped build a little company called Amazon.com. That's a whole other story in and of itself. And of course, I'm at Google. Google's interesting. Google's the only place that I know where an operations and supply chain guy could go off and build a computational genomics group that's working on things like autism and cancer. My group and I were very responsible for the work that went on at COP21, which is the Global Climate Summit in Paris last December. And it really, I think, is going to have a huge impact on the future of the planet. My job is simple. I tell people, I go to Google for volunteer work. Literally, I'm pretty close to the end of my career. And my job at Google, first and foremost, is to train the future leaders of the company. And that's kind of a liberating feeling when you get to go to work every day and go, I have no career aspiration, right? I don't want my boss's job. I don't want to get promoted. I don't want to get fired, but at the same time. And then, interestingly enough, my father, my brother, my son, and I all have dyslexia. And I couldn't read till I was in the 6th grade. And I literally got stuck in the back of the room, because not only could I not read, I was like the hyperactive troublemaker that was the class disruptor and class clown. And I spent most of my time from, I'm a product of parochial education, and I spent my 1st through 5th grade really in the back of the room. And probably they wondered why, if I would ever amount to anything. Okay, well, I showed them. So, anyway, I know a lot of you are preparing to go on to your next chapter in life. You all have this impression, right? Everything's up and to the right: career, happiness, money. I hate to burst your bubble. this is really how life works, right? You all have setbacks. I've been fired from jobs. I've had family illnesses, other setbacks. Life is not a bowl of cherries, but interestingly enough, when you look back on this stuff, these are the things that really make you, and they forge you, and they forge your character, because how you deal with adversity really makes you a resilient person. And what's really important is life. It's all about the trend line, right? What I've learned in life, what I've learned in career, and what I've learned in leadership. Maybe I'll write a book someday. I don't know. And in all seriousness, I think in the end, all you have is your friends and family. And that's something that you cannot lose. I live in this community called Silicon Valley. It's hyper competitive, it's hyper creative, it's hyper innovative, but it also takes a great personal drain on you because you're always on. I mentor people all over Silicon Valley, young people out of college, even some senior executives, and I think that's probably actually one of the most rewarding things I ever do. There's one common thread which, and it's going to sound stupid and crazy, but that's guided me in my career. I do things that I love to do, and I go to work because I have fun. And that's kind of my acid test. My boss asked me the other day, when would you leave Google? And I said, simple. When I stop having fun is the day that I'll pack my boxes and I'll leave. I learned this from Jeff Bezos. Jeff would if you ever talk to Jeff, Jeff has got this annoying, boisterous laugh, and he used to run around the office all the time and say, it's day one, ha, ha, ha. And the reality is, it is day one all the time because you're always recreating and reinventing things. You have to smell the roses. And it's funny, my dad was out, my dad's 76, he was out with me the other day at Google, and we were walking down the hallway, and it was 6 a.m., I had to do a con call with Europe, and I drug him along. And, we were walking down this dark hallway, it was actually on Thanksgiving, and he said, do you ever pinch yourself and think about the fact that you work at Google? And I'm like, no, I don't. I actually just take this all for granted. And I said, that's something I probably shouldn't do. Now, this next bullet point, if you're a junior or a senior at Purdue, you're going to find it incredibly, disheartening and frustrating because everything you've learned here, it's going to be obsolete in 10 years. And I mean that with all seriousness. The job that I've had, the last 3 jobs that I've had didn't exist when I left Purdue. There was no World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee invented that in like 91 or 92. So get used to the fact that, you have that nice piece of paper. It sits in my office at home. I occasionally look at it. You have to learn. All you're learning here is how to learn and learn more. And you're going to have to do that your whole life. I know a lot of miserable billionaires in Silicon Valley. And one thing that I've learned is money buys you options. It buys you a little bit of security, but it does not buy you happiness. And all you need to do is watch the Housewives of Orange County or Potomac or whatever, and you'll realize that very quickly. So what I learned, people ask me all the time, how do you get to be successful? I only know one thing, work really hard. I'm the family or the son of a bunch of German farmers, and they just taught me how to work hard. Do the crappy jobs. I was a newlywed. I was working at 2 in the morning on the night shift at Intel, wondering how does an MIT grad get to work the night shift at Intel? That was really what I thought I'd be doing the whole time that I spent 2 years at MIT. But the thing I realized was there was nobody around to actually even supervise me. So I was on my own. I could run this plant the way that I thought. And we did a bunch of bold experiments. They actually ended up running we ended up running the plant very, very uniquely and differently, and that led to some interesting opportunities. Most people have no clue about how decisions are made in their business. And this is what I tell people. You have to learn. You have to know how to do that. If you're young, particularly, you're going to make a lot of career changes in your life. I think the average new college person or graduate's going to probably be at 8 different careers and jobs. I hear this all the time. I talk to young people, and they're like, Google's a pretty good place to work. And they're like, let me tell you about all the bad things about Google. And I'm like, okay, I hate to sound like your dad, but it doesn't get any better than this. And, take it all with a grain of salt. This is something that I tell people, you got to leave, if you're going to leave a job, leave it on good terms. The world's small. You're going to live with your reputation for the rest of your life, probably. This is something that I hear all the time from people. If I just get that next career, when I became a VP for the first time, I was at Amazon. I went home. I had a nice dinner with my wife. I opened a bottle of champagne. I woke up the next day, and I looked in the mirror and said, I don't feel any differently. Nobody treated me any differently. Life was more of a headache because I had more responsibilities. And, what I learned in that whole lesson was it's not about, you got to learn the journey is what it's all about. The destination is kind of pointless. And the euphoria of that point B goal, it's very short-lived. So if you're waking up every day waiting for that next thing, it's a hollow victory. And then, one thing I never have a problem with at Google is, because I'm frequently the dumbest person in the room, is if you really want to get good, you better work with really smart people that teach you a lot. And fortunately, where I work, that's not a hard thing to do at all. You have to do, my son asks me this all the time, Dad, what do you think I should do? I don't know. Don't do what I did. You've got to do really well what you love to do. And if you do that, that's the secret of life. It's as simple as that. I talked about this, get out of your comfort zone, take risks. Most people don't have a board of advisors. Like who's, do you have somebody that can tell you really honestly what they think of you or how you manage people or what your faults are? That's something that I think is critically important. And I tell this to people all the time. I know it's probably a little bit controversial, but I tell people, look, go to a growth company, go to a growth area. I've done layoffs, they're not fun. I actually laid off 10% of Amazon one time. That was in ancient history days. That's not a fun thing to do. But when the ocean rises, all boats tend to rise. And candidly, that's why I've stayed in technology for most of my life. Do something incredibly unique and special so that everybody knows you for that. And I think that's something that, be known for something that only you do. And, again, people ask me, what do you think that is? I don't know. I think you've got to know yourself and what you do well. You got to think in systems, and this is something that I think that Purdue is very well suited for. You've got to think about your company as this complex system and look at the problems from multiple vantage points. And then, I suspect a lot of us are engineers, so we love models, right? Oh, show me the Excel model that X, Y, and Z. All models are wrong. It's just a matter of if the assumptions that went into those models are good or bad, garbage in, garbage out. So you should always question models and assumptions. Okay, leadership. So I learned this point from the head of HR at Cisco. I think this is the best definition of leadership I've ever heard. Leadership is all about getting people better than you and smarter than you to actually want to follow you somewhere. And I think that there's no better definition of leadership than that. I'm lucky if I'm the smartest guy in the room, 1 in 20 meetings at Google. And I know when to shut up, and I know when to listen. And my team, I'm 52, my average team, the average age of my team, is 29 years old. The best idea sometimes is the new college hire that has done something very uniquely. My 16-year-old laughs at me because I still don't know how to use Snapchat. And I realize that, although I work in this great technology company, I might even be a technical neophyte at times. So, I truly believe this. I've seen some of the best leaders in Silicon Valley that, you would walk into a restaurant and not know who they are. And humility and check your ego at the door. We all hate politicians because they're kind of smarmy and they don't, they're not real. And being real is I think incredibly important. I talked about hard work, but I really believe that the ability to leadership takes a lot of personal energy and it takes a lot of physical energy. And recharging. I always go through all my managers and look who's got the most vacation accrued. And I go to them and say, look, you know what? Take a vacation, get out of here and recharge your batteries because I want you to be on your A game all the time. I talked about this. I worked for the chief operating officer of Cisco, a guy, Randy Pond. Randy was great because, he lived this value of what you see is what you get. And I think that, that's something that I've always kept with me. And you never stray from your values. You're going to live with your reputation for the rest of your lives. There are times when, all of us are going to be in moral and ethical dilemmas. And that's when the time, you got to step back and really, look at your morals and how you were raised. Andy Grove says, he just passed away a few weeks ago, but Andy used to talk about only the paranoid survive. And he would say that, and I absolutely believe that. In Silicon Valley, it's a fairly common euphemism to say, you're only as good as your last 6 months. I actually don't wake up and I'm not afraid of Amazon, I'm not afraid of Facebook. I'm actually afraid of the 2 people over in Menlo Park or Palo Alto that are, working for pennies in their garage with the next great idea that we're not even thinking of. Because those are the people that are going to be the next Google or the next Facebook. You never believe your own PR. People tell you what they think that you want to hear, and particularly as you I don't tend to Google myself or read anything about myself because it's just not very important anymore. I think this is something you have to do. You have to bleed passion for what you do. I mean, I wake up every day and go, I can't wait to go to work. I can't wait to go home at the end of the day, because it's been a long day, but you really have to love what you do. Is something that Andy Grove. I asked Andy one time when I became a first-time manager for the first time, Andy, give me a piece of advice, and he said, make decisions. I was like, what the heck? What do you mean? That doesn't sound very, earth-shattering. And he said, no. The rate at which companies succeed or fail is the rate at which they make decisions. And he was absolutely right. I've seen this played out a bazillion times in Silicon Valley. Yeah, we love, again, engineers love complexity, but our job is really not to, increase it, but to decrease it. I asked our former CFO at Google, a guy, Patrick Piché, how did you succeed? This guy was a very successful guy at Google for a while. And he said, I always feel like I'm never in control. I always feel like there's something more that needs to be done. And, you can take that to an extreme in an unhealthy way, but I really believe that there is this underlying fear of failure that's a great motivator. I would never, now for the record, I'd never, want to see that be part of the organization, but I think that that's something that's common with a lot of people at Google. My job is to know when to get out of the way. I give my team resources, I help them define the problem, and then I basically scoot out of the way and let them do it because they're probably more capable than I am. Larry said this, Larry Page, our CEO, said this when he first took over the job. And we were talking about becoming a new CEO, and he came up with this great saying that people want to be led. They don't want to be managed. People don't want to be told what to do. You just set a big goal for people, and people are really industrious, and they're really good at figuring these things out. This one might be a little controversial, but my job is to occasionally, not often, say things that other people won't say, and that ruffles feathers, but it keeps people on their toes occasionally. And then I love this from Colin Powell. I think it's probably one of the best. My job is really to be the chief cheerleader in all the roles that I've had. And you think about it, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. I mean, I walk in a room and I've been to some real disasters. You look at that and go, oh, this is a disaster. How are we ever going to fix this? But I can't turn around to my team and say, how the heck did you screw this up? It's like, okay, guys, we got a great opportunity to fix this thing. We'll get it right. We'll go create the next piece of history. So on that, I think that's it. So, all right.